Hello and welcome to this Nuffield Research Placement student webinar. This webinar series has been designed to complement your research placement by sharing real stories from STEM professionals and ambassadors. Over the course of this webinar series, our range of speakers will provide expert advice and guidance on future career opportunities and pathways that are open to you as a STEM student. By sharing bite-sized insights into the varied world of STEM careers, we hope that you will come away understanding more about the exciting ways in which you can apply your STEM education. Each webinar in this series features approximately 15 minutes of presentation from our guest speaker, followed by a question and answer session. In this webinar, we're going to hear from Dr. Sophie Shaw. Sophie is a bioinformatician at the All Wales Genomic Service, and they'll be speaking to you about how their role combines biology and computer science and how you can follow the same path. With that, I'd like to welcome and hand over to Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie Shaw, and today I'm just going to give you a brief presentation about what I do as a bioinformatician at the All Wales Medical Genomic Service. So I'm going to cover who I am and what I do on a regular day, and then also talk to you about how I got here, so my current path to becoming a bioinformatician. And then at the end, we'll have a brief question and answer session. So, as I said, I'm Dr. Sophie Shaw, and my job title is bioinformatician. So, on a day-to-day basis, what I work on is computational analysis of DNA sequencing data. So, we take DNA and we will prepare this in a laboratory and put it through a DNA sequencer, and this produces a complex file, such as the one shown on the side here, which then needs to be analysed with computer programs to get biological information. And my work involves this analysis. And I carry this out at the All Wales Medical Genomic Service, and this is part of the NHS in Wales. So a bioinformatician is a combination between a biologist and a computer programmer, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I reached this position and how what my training has been in the background. But generally it's a combination of both. So I have biological knowledge, but I also have computer programming knowledge. The job itself is primarily carried out on a computer, so I don't go into a lab, but everything is considered dry work where I work on a computer on a day-to-day basis. This does also involve some elements of statistics and data analysis, but primarily it's computer programming and biology. The All Wales Medical Genomic Service where I work is part of the NHS, and our role is for diagnostics and support for patients who have or may be at risk of having a genetic condition. So some examples of this might include genome sequencing of children which are critically ill, and this will give them a diagnosis, but then also sequencing of specific genes in cancer patients to try and help give diagnostic markers or treatment information for those patients. How did I become a bioinformatician? So my career path has taken me through research then in towards the clinic. So I started out doing my GCSEs. This is a picture of me here on the left in the early 2000s during my GCSEs, and then moved on to doing my A-levels. And these were primarily science-based A-levels, so biology, chemistry, psychology, and mathematics. This then took me to my degree I carried out at the University of Exeter, and this was in molecular biology. And I was the first person in my family to graduate from university. So this was a really big deal. And this was primarily focused on molecular sciences, so genetics and biology and some elements of chemistry as well. During my time at the University of Exeter, I also carried out a short research placement for the Genetic Society, where I carried out some research on some yeast in the lab, and this gave me a taste for lab work and inspired me to then apply for my PhD. This was also carried out at the University of Exeter, and I carried out the PhD in biological sciences, and this was looking at a yeast species called Candida albicans, and I studied the genetics of this yeast. This was half lab work, so I spent a lot of time in the lab making yeast strains, but then also an equal amount of time on the computer doing computational analysis of the data. And this was primarily DNA sequencing data like I work on today. And this gave me a real flavour and taste for bioinformatics, and I found that when I was doing this, I really, really enjoyed the dry work and the lab analysis, and so this and the computer analysis. So this is what I then continued doing. After my PhD, I continued in research and did a short research job called a research fellow for about a year, and this was again working in yeast, but this was studying biocontrol. So this was looking at certain fungal species that are present in soil that help to control against pathogenic fungal species and also produce metabolites that encourage growth of plant growth promotion factors. Again, this was semi in the lab, so this is why here this picture is very small. I did a little bit of lab work, but primarily this was computational analysis of sequencing data. And this is where I learned a lot of the skills that I needed to become a bioinformatician. After that, I moved to the University of Aberdeen at the other end of the country, where I took my first role primarily as a bioinformatician, and this was computational analysis of sequencing data on a day-to-day basis. I worked with researchers at the university to help them analyse their data. So I didn't have any of my own research, but instead worked with others to help them reach their research goals. And this was across both biology and medicine, and would be on lots of different types of sequencing analysis and lots of different species. So I worked with human data, I worked with data from bacteria, I worked with data from chickens and frogs and sheep and all sorts of different organisms. After 6 years of working at the University of Aberdeen, I then moved towards a clinical setting where I now work at the All Wales Medical Genomic Service. So still carrying out bioinformatics and analysis of DNA sequencing data, but now completely in a clinical setting, looking only at human data for diagnostic and prognostic purposes. A big part of my job, both now and also at the University of Aberdeen, is also educating others about genomics and bioinformatics. So I run workshops aimed for researchers to help them teach the skills that are needed for computational analysis. And I also am involved in training the trainees that come through our department here. So my role, my route to becoming a clinical bioinformatician is slightly different than what other people might take. So I have a lot of background in research before becoming a clinical bioinformatician, but generally other people might take different routes to becoming a registered bioinformatician or a registered clinical scientist. There are two main ways that people will go about this. There's something called the Scientist Training Program, which is a postgraduate training program designed for people who want to become clinical scientists. They'll first undertake a relevant degree, so this would be in life sciences or biomedical sciences, and then they'd undertake the STP program, which is a work-based program where they are in the clinic or within a hospital setting every single day, but also carry out a master's program alongside this for 3 years. There's also the STP equivalence route, which is awarded by the Academy of Healthcare Science, and this is a qualification for those with equivalent experience to the STP program. And this is what I'm currently undertaking so that I can get my HCPC registration. So I'm undertaking the equivalence training program. So a regular day as a bioinformatician will generally involve a lot of writing and testing code, which runs specific software to carry out this DNA sequencing analysis. And a lot of that also involves formatting the outputs of these software so that it's interpretable by humans. The computers will often spit out data which is hard to interpret, so a lot of my work is trying to make this more accessible to clinicians and other healthcare scientists so that they can analyse the data. I also write and test code which builds databases which interface with the web, so that is databases that people can access their data on. And as we have patient data being sequenced, I check that this patient data is sequenced correctly and that it's ensuring that it's meeting our quality cutoffs so that it's to a high enough standard for us to use for analysis purposes. If any samples are not at this cutoff, I will fail these samples and discuss that failure with the laboratory team or other members of the team to try and work out a reason why the sample has failed and why it might need repeating. And then a lot of what my work involves is looking at the future of testing and genetic testing, and then putting into place new code and validating new tests for new genetic tests. And as well as I've already mentioned, teaching and training other new clinical scientists that are joining the team. And then also a lot of continuing professional development. So I do a lot of training myself so that I can make sure that I'm always knowledgeable about the most up-to-date type of analysis and research going on. So to be able to do this job, there are a raft of skills that I need. So primarily I need the biological and coding knowledge to be able to carry out the job, but I also need a lot of skills in problem solving. So writing code is quite often like solving a problem, and you have to try and attempt things, see if they work, and if they don't, try and edit them and modify them slightly to try and get them to work. As a lot of iteration around problem solving, and that often also requires a lot of idea generation. So you have to often be creative in the way that you try and think about problems and try and overcome them. I have to work in large teams across lots of different departments and lots of different groups. So this involves really good communication across these teams. Also really careful planning on who is required to do what in each of the projects. And often I'm involved in communicating some complex biological and computational ideas to non-experts. So I need to make sure that I have the correct language and I'm approaching people correctly to be able to communicate this data. And I also need an overall awareness of the importance of the data because I'm working on patient data. I have to act with levels of confidentiality to follow certain rules. And I also need to make sure that the data is being processed accurately and quickly to be able to get the results to patients as quickly and as accurately as possible. And that's a quick overview of what I do as a bioinformatician and how I managed to get into this role. So do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Sophie, for that really insightful presentation. I'm sure that many of our students watching will be really intrigued by that field and perhaps didn't know much about it now, but now they do. I've got some questions for you. A question for our computer science students watching: can someone become a bioinformatician if they're from a computer science background, or do they have to be a scientist?
No, so you don't have to be from a biological background. There will be people that come from a computer science background who have the skills in coding and then they acquire the skills in biology. So this might be through undertaking a master's degree in biology or further training biology to be able to get that knowledge. But there will be people that will come from both areas of backgrounds that become bioinformaticians.
Thank you, Sophie. Second question: what is the best piece of advice you received during your career and how has it helped you?
When I first started out during my PhD, I was advised to get become close with a mentor, so somebody who within the field that I really looked up to, that was approachable and that I knew would be able to offer me advice. And I've tried to stick through by this. So in each of my job roles, I've quite quickly identified somebody that would be a good mentor for me, and I've always asked them for advice about my career, about what I should be doing next, about what I should be learning, and if there's not been somebody available, I know that there's always systems available. So lots of universities and lots of research places and places of work have mentor schemes so that there are people available for you to speak to. And I find that really, really valuable just to get somebody else's insight who's already been there and already done that.
Perfect, thank you. And the Nuffield students that are watching, that's a great piece of advice because you can take advantage of the mentoring opportunities that are available during the programme. So yeah, please do take that opportunity. And then finally, what can an NRP student do if they're interested in becoming a bioinformatician and want to get a head start?
So if you're really interested in becoming a bioinformatician, both in either research or within a clinical setting, then I would recommend looking at further degrees in life science fields, so in biology or computer science or a combination. There are some places that now offer a bioinformatics degree or master's degree, and generally becoming comfortable with using computers and command line. There are loads of online resources available to do tasters in coding in command line, in coding with Python and lots of different languages. There are things out there such as coding clubs, or even getting hold of a Raspberry Pi, which is a very small, cheap computer which you can do your own coding on, and just to get a feel and a play around for that. And then also just seek out as much advice as you can from other people out there that are already in this field to guide you on your way.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sophie. And thanks again for the presentation. Really interesting field that you work in. Just to note that all of the resources that Sophie signposted during her presentation will be available in the description, so please do take the time to read them. There's lots of really great information there. And of course, please take the time to watch the other videos in the series. Thank you very much.